Good evening and welcome back to World Talks here on TVP World. I'm Saria Strzemska. Protests are once again sweeping across Iran, marking the most serious challenge to the Islamic Republic since 2022. A US-based human rights group says more than 500 people have been killed in anti-government demonstrations, with thousands more arrested across the country. As the unrest grows, tensions are spilling beyond Iran's borders. Donald Trump has warned the US could intervene if force is used against protesters, prompting sharp warnings from Tehran. So what's driving this latest wave of protests? How serious is the threat to Iran's leadership, and how close are we to a wider regional crisis? To discuss, I have Ellias Dehnavi, political scientist at Mickiewicz University in Poznań, joining me right now. Good evening, sir. Delighted to have you with us.
Good evening, and I'm delighted to contribute to today's talk.
So there are reports of a growing gap between how protests in Iran are viewed inside the country and how they're portrayed abroad. I mean, people inside Iran rely on the national internet and satellite TV for information, and these domestic platforms present a far more subdued picture than the international outlets, from what I gathered. So some reports also suggest that protests in Tehran peaked late last week and have since diminished. Can you clarify this for us? What is the current situation in Iran? Are the protests continuing to grow, or to the contrary, are they losing momentum?
Well, please allow me to start by shedding light on the roots of this, the current wave of protests. The current wave of protests actually reflect years of societal anger towards the policy failure of the ruling establishment. What initially simmered under the surface has now erupted through economic grievances, intensified and triggered by the market volatility. So the bazaar and economy and the real free fall actually started this, the current waves of protest. Regarding the satellite connection or the general communication, I should remind our audience that it's now 72 hours that we're experiencing a sheer state of blackouts in Iran. The internet has been shut down and people don't have access to landline phones. Mobile-to-mobile connection and landline communication has been strictly limited, and people from outside, the Iranian diaspora, cannot communicate with their family. So it started on January 8th and it's now, continuing. And regarding the final segment of your question and about, the future of the protest, I should say it really depends on the fresh data that can be transmitted outside the country. Based on the ground facts, the regime has brutally repressed the protesters on the street. This, combined with the internet blackout, might increase, the risk of loss for the protesters, loss to their lives and their dear ones. So it really depends on the system and also on the foreign rhetoric and the foreign intervention, that how a mixture of all these elements affect the ongoing streams on the street.
So who, if anyone, is actually leading these protests? And by extension, if the protesters were to succeed and the Islamic Republic were overthrown, who would take over? Many demonstrators have been calling for the return of Reza Pahlavi, the son of the exiled Iran's last shah. Do you give it any credence? Would that be an option?
Well, he's the only person who has unified the voices in the opposition. If I want to scientifically speak about, the current condition, we don't have any other unifying figure. And besides that, he's been educated, he's been trained, and he's been watching and leading a majority of the population. He's been waiting for this day, and at the moment, he's the only unifying figure for the opposition. And the majority of people on the street have been chanting his name. and the majority of people are listening to his call. Of course, there are concerns about the future, but at the moment, the protesters prefer to focus on the street and to focus on their demands rather the future, or rather about the democratic transition. The current state of affairs matter more.
So let's go back, because this is sort of like a second wave of protests. So let's go back to 2022 and the protests that erupted after the death of Mahsa Amini at the hands of morality police. So what caused those protests to eventually die down, and how do you see the current situation unfolding?
The Iranian government has a very complicated way of repressing the opponents. It's a mixture of different techniques. And the Iranian population doesn't have, they require access to means to, resist against the repressive forces. So naturally and technically speaking, the protest cannot continue like that, because everybody will die on the street. This is a rational reaction towards a repressive force that cannot be stopped. And unfortunately, the foreign, support from the international community is not promising. So all these things together, and the technical methods like DPI, which stands for this deep packet inspection that they use to block the internet, eventually lead to the repression of the people on the street. Because when you cut down the internet, and when people have not connection, they cannot prepare for the rally. They cannot transmit the news. So this is one important reason. And the other reason, as I mentioned earlier, is that people cannot continue without receiving the required support, because they cannot stand with their bare hands against a system that is using an ultimate repressive force against them. So in what country, in what society can people endure? This is not the problem of the Iranian society, but this is a technical issue. This is a fact. This is a logical phenomena that is stopping the protesters to advance. So at the moment, it is very important to see the distance between the American rhetoric and the reality on the ground. We have to wait and see whether the January 3rd tweets of President Donald Trump and other leaders actually turn into some sort of concrete action, or they stay as simple rhetorics.
And you've mentioned foreign powers, so let's take a look at the broader regional picture. Bibi Netanyahu said he's closely watching the developments in Iran. Of course, the collapse of the Islamic Republic would be in the interest of Israel. But what about Arab states? What kind of reactions are we expecting here, if any?
Well, speaking of the Arab nations, I would like to highlight the role of Saudi Arabia as the leading figure among the Arab nations in the Middle East. Of course, Saudi Arabia is a sponsor of the status quo, and they don't want any kind of fraction in the current security structure of the Middle East. Any upheaval in the current state of affairs will lead to this stable condition in the Arab countries. So Saudi Arabia is not pro-revolutionary change. They are not pro-structural change, and they are not pro-huge revolutionary movement in Iran. But of course, due to diplomatic reasons, they cannot talk about it loudly, and they need to just keep this diplomatic channel and asking the Iranian government to solve this problem through peaceful channels. But behind the curtains, talks are going on. They're talking to the Americans. Qataris are talking to Americans. The foreign minister of Oman has always, adhering to his traditional role of intermediation between the Iranian and the Americans. And he has brought some letters and requests from the U.S. presidential office to Tehran. So we can see a very dangerous dynamic in the Middle East evolving and hinging around Iran. But to wrap up my statement regarding the Arab nations, they are pro-status quo, and they don't want a drastic change.
So historically, from Iraq to Libya, the aftermath of U.S. interventions has rarely been smooth, right? Even former President Barack Obama has said that one of his biggest regrets was not planning for the day after the removal of Gaddafi in Libya. So given those lessons, do you think that the U.S. will decide to intervene in Iran? And if so, what would its plan be for after the Islamic Republic regime is overthrown?
Well, this is indeed a very complicated question and very complicated scenario. First of all, I should say that the Iranian society is not 100% optimistic when it comes to the foreign forces intervention. A part of the society, let me correct myself, because as you mentioned earlier, they have witnessed the changes in Libya, Syria, so they're a little bit afraid. And on the other hand, the majority of the society is calling for the U.S. intervention because they know that they have no means to resist against the regime and against the system. So they're asking for intervention in order to return the crown prince and to establish a democratic form of government. And the next part of the question, it is unknown because we don't know if the Americans are really planning to implement their schedules and their schemes to actually work in accordance to their schedule and to implement their scheme. Because that's going to be very, complex for the Americans. Iranians have an active proxies. They can easily bring up problems for the American bases in the Middle East to the American soldiers. They have threatened them. So the Americans don't want a full-fledged war at the moment because it will bring them enormous economic and political consequences. So at the moment, they will try to focus on protecting and providing for the protestants and also to provide logical and rational aids. They might financially help the protesters. They might shrink the economy of the Islamic Republic if there is anything left of that economy. And they will also try to put the international pressure on the political figures. These elements are more logical. And the next level is a controlled military operation, targeted operation, let's say, without engaging fully into the war. They might target the headquarters of the repressive forces, and they might also target some leaders that are leading the repression. So these are the options that Americans have. But a scenario like Venezuela or deploying soldiers or deploying ammunition to the Iranian territory is not something that Americans are planning for.
Mm-hmm. Elias, so how might Russia respond to such a shift in Iran? I mean, with its influence in Syria already weakened, what would Iranian regime's potential collapse mean for Moscow's regional strategy?
100% they won't be happy because the Iranians have been a very loyal and traditional, the Iranian government, because we have to differentiate between the Iranian society and the Iranian government. So I say the Iranian government has been a traditional friend to the oligarchy in Moscow. So any change in the current structure, the current political structure, will make them sad. Most probably they won't be happy because they're going to lose a very important fort that's been historically placed between them and the West. And Iran, historically speaking, has been a close strategic friend to the West, especially the Americans, and they have lost that position. By they, I'm referring to the Americans, for the last 50 years. So restoring that position is of high importance, specifically for the Trump administration that's trying to restore the old image of the U.S. to make America great again. So he's actually adhering to his code of conduct. So Russians will lose a very important fort. They will lose a very important friend. The Chinese won't also be happy because they will also lose another important economic partner in the Middle East and also a very cheap oil exporter. So for the East Bloc, it's not good news.
Mm-hmm. But do you think that Russia could potentially do something?
The Russians try not to interfere directly, as they haven't interfered in their affairs in Venezuela. We've witnessed it 2 weeks ago that they try to state. The Chinese, 100%, we are 100% sure that they won't take any hard measurements. The Russians might show some sort of dissent through diplomatic channels, but behind the curtains, most probably before any imminent and immediate actions, our audience should be aware that the Russians and Americans will actually conduct their secretive discussions behind the curtains before any important moves.
Ellias Aghili, thank you so much thank you so much for joining us. Unfortunately, our time is up. Thank you so very much. Have a good night.
You're most welcome. And let's hope for peace. Thank you.
Political scientist at Mickiewicz University was my guest this evening. Thank you for watching World Talks, and please stay tuned for more.